play along with the Allman Brothers, play along with Little Feat, play along with Motown. That's simpler forms of music, but the bass is usually the backbone of all those records we're talking about.
Hi, and welcome to ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, and I help people who want to learn to play bass, but haven't gotten very far with it yet, or at least not far enough. My interview this week is with John Cowan of the Doobie Brothers, talking all about the Doobie Brothers' brand new album, as well as some Newgrass stuff that John has done. Great interview coming up in just a minute. But first, you should know that if you've ever wanted to learn bass, there are thousands of people right now inside the For Bass Players Only community, men and women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. And you know what they're doing? They're learning bass. They're having the time of their life playing music that they love. You need to come join them and experience that incredible transformation for yourself. As I always say, you're never too old to groove. So let's play bass. John Cowan is a bassist and also a very fantastic vocalist, best known as the voice of Newgrass and, of course, for his playing with the Doobie Brothers. A member of the Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame, John has collaborated with many of the biggest names in music, including Victor Wooten, Zac Brown, Glenn Campbell, Kenny Rogers, Darius Rucker, the Moody Blues, Alison Krauss, Bella Fleck, and Garth Brooks, to name a few. John's career took off in Louisville, Kentucky in the early 70s when he was a member of the progressive bluegrass ensemble Newgrass Revival. In the 90s, he briefly joined the Doobie Brothers. He was there for a few years before making several critically acclaimed solo albums throughout the 2000s, right up to the present day. After rejoining the Doobie Brothers in 2010, John has since maintained his successful solo career alongside their global touring schedule, and he has written a 2024 memoir called Hold to a Dream, which you're going to hear all about in the interview, and a debut album with the HercuLeons in March of 2025. Here's my interview with John Cowan. Enjoy. Hi, John.
Hey, John, how are you?
Good. It's so good to see you again. You know, I mentioned in a recent email, I said, I know it seems like we just did an interview, but that was over 2 years ago. And
Yeah, that seems about right. But time just is like I don't even know how to measure it anymore. It goes so fast.
well, you're making good use of it because one of the main reasons I wanted to reach out and get an update from you is because of the new Doobie Brothers record that came out in June, and also some of your own stuff, solo album and the album you put out with the HercuLeons. So it's only been 2 years, but you've done a lot. So where do you want to start? You want to start with the Doobie Brothers album? Walk me.
Sure,
I've been
absolutely.
listening to it and enjoying it very much, and it's got some it's great to hear Michael McDonald on it and some other names. Mavis Staples, I haven't heard that name in a long time. Pino Palladino, Dean Parks, Bob Glaub, Mark Russo, Sean Hurley, Mick Fleetwood, and John Cowan, of course. So
Yeah.
talk to me about the record. How did this all come together? Why was now the time? And why don't I shut up and let you talk?
I think perhaps what might have been the genesis of this is Patrick Simmons lives in Maui, and Mike McDonald used to live there. And we were there, strangely enough, we were there for about a week. And the week after we left there is when the fire happened that burned Maui, that side of Maui in the island. And because Pat and Mike both, Pat's still a resident, Mike a former resident, they got together and wrote a song that was a tribute, and it was used to raise money, raise funds for the residents of Maui.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps it just seemed like at that point we need to make a record because there hasn't been a record with everyone on it, including Tom Johnston, John McPhee, Patrick Simmons, Michael McDonald, in a very, very long time since, it's been a long time, late 80s.
Yeah.
So, and Michael came back, I think, almost 5 years ago. So, and that's been a resurgence in the career for a lot of reasons, because there, as you know, there was two Doobie Brother bands. There was the first one with Tom and Pat, China Grove, Blackwater, all that material. And then Tom left. And then Michael came in, and we had the 80s with What a Fool Believes and all the songs of Mike's repertoire. So it's kind of nice for the fans, and for me as well as a fan, to see every version of the band live.
Yeah.
So I think that was a great impetus in doing a record together.
Well, other than the song about Hawaii, that's the last song on the album, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the rest of the material? Is that stuff that had been building up over time, or was it some of it put together just for this album, or what?
They all, I think they all wrote with John Shanks, who's the producer.
Yeah.
John's lives in Los Angeles. He's a guitar player, really fine guitar player, really fine songwriter, and fine producer. He's done oodles of contemporary pop music. And my understanding is that every tune was written with John. The way the Doobies seem to do it these days is Tom will gather some ideas, song ideas, and he goes to John Shanks. Pat will gather song ideas, then he goes to John. Same with Mike McDonald. So they're all co-written with John, as far as I know. So I think it was all done for this project. I don't think there was any surplus and old stuff that was brought into the cachet, so to speak.
I heard an interview, I think it was last week. I was driving around on some channel on Sirius.
I'm so sorry. My phone just rang. Let me turn it off. Okay, there.
Yeah. And it sounded like they were having a good time, just fielding questions and telling stories behind it. And they were talking about old stuff too, like Blackwater. And
Oh yeah,
I learned some stuff I didn't know.
I
But
did too during the interview. Well, I learned stuff too as well when we were in the middle of the interviews for television last week. So
what about I mentioned a handful of names. How did the process of choosing the personnel come about?
that's really John Shanks's call. He has um, a coterie, so to speak, of musicians he likes to use on his records. So I think that's, though in the past it's usually been Bob Glaub playing bass. So I was kind of surprised to see Pino on there. I was pleasantly surprised. He's one of mine, every bass player's heroes. So
Yeah.
as well as Bob is, and I've gotten to know Bob over the years. We're friends, and he's a sweet, wonderful guy. Of course, I don't know Pino. I haven't met him.
Yeah, I've interviewed Bob a couple of times. He is a good guy. Um, you're doing a tour to promote the record, but
Yeah,
I don't remember if that kicked off yet, or is that coming up over the summer or what?
it's coming up over the summer. We're starting in Europe. We leave here on the 6th of July, and we go to Scotland, then to Ireland, then we wind up in London playing at Hyde Park with Electric Light Orchestra. So that'll be quite
Wow.
quite an event.
Oh yeah. Wow.
And then we'll go to Manchester from there.
Wow. I'd like to get tickets for that. That would be my
Good luck.
yeah. Thanks. Yeah, my wife and I will be in England in September, but I think we'll miss you by then. So tell me what else is going on with you. I know you mentioned a solo album and some other stuff. So bring us up to date of some of the major highlights since the last.
Well, let's see. In May, a bunch of stuff happened this year for me during the Doobie Brothers off time. I put a book out that I've been working on for a pretty long time. That came out in May, and that's called Hold to a Dream. And what the book is, I had a radio show, a peer-to-peer interview show, for about 14 months on kind of world famous WSM, home of the Grand Ole Opry, here in Nashville.
Yeah.
And I had a peer-to-peer interview show where I interviewed other artists. And it went on for 14 months. And I had great people I interviewed on Justin Hayward, Sam Bush, Bela Fleck, Chris Hillman, Bonnie Bramlett. I'm going to forget some names here. Jim Messina, Chris Hillman. Did I mention Chris Hillman? Rodney Crowell. I always forget people. Anyway, so what happened was I took these interviews and a friend of mine transferred them from audio. He literally word by word. He didn't do it with a processor. He took the audio interviews and turned them into words. And so we had a manuscript then of all these 14 interviews, took it to a couple of publishers. Publishers loved it. One of the one that we wound up with said, well, we'd like you to write a little piece about each person you interviewed. So I did that. Then I turned that in and they said, well, we think you probably should write a very brief, but a memoir of some kind. So it's the 14 interviews, and then it's the story of my life from when I joined Newgrass Revival in 1974 to when that band ended in 1990. So it's called Hold to a Dream, a Newgrass Odyssey. So that was the book that came out in May. I then also put a solo record out that was, I call it a Newgrass record, because all the records I've done since that band broke up, I've used acoustic instruments, but I've never done a record that had just the instrumentation that we had in Newgrass Revival, which is me on electric bass, mandolin, acoustic guitar, fiddle, and banjo. So it sounds like it's my intentional tribute to that band. And that came out in June. And then I made a band record with my partner, Andrea, my musical partner, Andrea Zahn, who's an amazing singer and fiddler she's been in James Taylor's band for about 22 years. So we made a record called the HercuLeons. So that's kind of catching you up to everything I've done in the last year or two.
Wow. You've been busy.
I have been.
I think
gratefully busy.
I think people had a lot of pent up energy during COVID, and a lot of stuff came out. Well, not just after, but during, but I guess during and after. And we all have kind of different perspectives after having lived through that period, I think.
Well, that's how this band got started with Andre is we got called, we had been friends for 20 years before that, but we ended up doing a session together, a custom record project, and we sang together for like 8 or 9 hours. And this is right at the beginning of the pandemic. And on the way home from the session that night, we both called each other roughly about the same time to express how wonderful it was to sing with each other. So then we started thinking, we were talking about, well, maybe we should, people seem to be playing live on Facebook and doing these Facebook Live concerts. Maybe we should do that. So we assembled some other hotshot young bluegrass musicians, and that's how that got started on Facebook Live.
Awesome. And the title of that record?
That is called the HercuLeons.
Oh, that's right. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Any updates or changes to your gear, your basses, your effects, amps, speakers, strings, anything along those lines?
No, I'm still playing. It's funny. I have this bass that I call Whitey that I've had since 1975.
You call it what?
Whitey.
Whitey. Okay.
It's a 62 jazz bass. It's a beautiful instrument, but I can't play it anymore because it weighs too much. Even though the wood is dried out considerably from a 1962 instrument, I had to have surgery on my neck this year where they fused hardware into my spinal column. So I tried playing Whitey. I took him to rehearsal for these TV shows we did a couple weeks ago, and I just couldn't do it. So I've been playing these Bluesman vintage basses forever now because they're super light. They're ported to begin with, but then they also are made from Palinga wood, which is almost weightless. So they weigh a little bit more than a Stratocaster, but a lot less than a regular electric bass.
Yeah.
So hence, plus they're wonderful instruments.
Yeah, you mentioned it in the last interview, actually. I was watching those this morning, the last two.
Yeah. So that's the only change really in my gear, except that I went to GK for my on-stage amp, a
Ah,
410 GK, which I really like.
yeah, those are great. I was never disappointed when I showed up at a gig and they had, well, they used to have like the 800 RB for me, or sometimes they'd have an Ampeg SVT. Those were great.
You, let me ask you a question. Do you have a preferred choice for envelope filters?
Not really. I am not the most gear and tech savvy person. I just kind of plug in and make sure we're in tune and the tone is good. And in the 80s, in my heyday, when I was doing all this touring and traveling and all over the place, and MIDI was this brand new thing that we all
Oh,
had. And I would travel with these guys and they started talking and they'd get excited and they'd start talking faster. Then all of a sudden it went into Spanish. They're talking Spanish. So, and
what?
I got, I got into it just because I got a drum machine and I got a D50 that I still have over here. And I got the Alesis drum machine and I got a Macintosh Plus with a 40, not a 45 meg, but a 46 meg hard drive. I said, hey, that ought to do it.
Wow.
And floppy disks back and forth. But electronic musician magazine and music technology, and I just didn't. And then what is this? Omni on, Omni off. How do you work this thing? And it was taking me away from what I really wanted to do, which was play and write and make music and record. So things have gotten a lot more idiot friendly, I'm happy to say. But short answer to your question, no, I don't have a favorite as far as envelope filters. Do you?
I do, but it's proven to be not very roadworthy. I have one of the original Mutron pedals.
Oh,
Not now. I've actually, it's not one of the. It's not. It's one of the knockoffs that they started making within the last 30 years. I had a real one in the '70s, and I don't know what became of it. Anyways, and I use it very seldom. But I don't even have one with me now. The only thing I use with the Doobies is I have a nice chorus pedal that I use just for little lines here and there, maybe stuff higher up the neck. Anyways,
I had a
that's it for
Mutron.
my effects.
I had a Mutron pedal in the 70s also when I was a guitar player.
Oh wow.
And wow, I haven't thought about that in the longest time. Nothing else like a Sans amp or anything else that you,
No, mm-mm,
yeah, cool.
no. And it astounds me. We use in-ear molded in-ears.
Yeah.
I don't understand the technology. So okay, this is as big as the speaker is in your ear, right?
You're right.
It sounds like you're sitting in front of an acoustic with a folded 18-inch speaker behind it. I don't know how that happens, but I love the sound of, at least in my ears, bass sounds fabulous.
Yeah. It's amazing what they can do. And then you were a long time D'Addario string guy, right? But I think you mentioned Labella also in the last
Yeah, I've switched to the low tension flats.
Labella.
Hmm. They're great. But speaking of Pinot Palladino, I just saw an ad there. Ernie Ball is doing a Pinot Palladino series of flat ones. There's two different kinds. There's a regular gauge and a light gauge, and I'm thinking about checking those out too.
Yeah. I
But because
remember.
I'm a flat wound guy, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember those super slinkies or extra super slinkies with the pink wrappers back in the
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I remember those. Boy, they're still around.
I think it kind of revolutionized the string industry once those came around.
Yeah.
Because I remember in the '70s, like guitar players, everybody was using those super slinky Ernie Ball strings.
Yep, yep. Remember them well. And the gauges were it was like 0.00007 or 9 or whatever it was. No, it was like 0.009 or something like that. They were really light strings. Remember?
And Labella still makes those. They called them for a while. They called them the gigantic flat bass strings. I think they're called 1964 now, but for a while though they were called the James Jamerson set.
Yeah.
They were the E strings was a 110, I believe, huge,
Wow.
and I believe the G strings were 50. So Pretty,
That's heavy.
it is. You have to be careful with what kind of neck you put them on too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tension on them.
But you're pretty much a labella guy now?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I use, it depends. I have two because we do most of Mike's stuff, Michael McDonald's stuff, we do in regular standard tuning, and then about the other half of the show is everything is tuned down a half step. So, anyways,
How many basses do you take on the road with you?
just two.
Oh,
Yeah.
that
I
makes it.
wish I don't like switching, to be honest, because it's tricky.
Well, you're reminding me of do you know who Pete Griffin is?
No, I do not.
He was touring with he did when Brian Beller got busy with the Aristocrats, he had been playing with Zappa plays Zappa.
All right.
And so Pete picked up that gig and he did that for a while, but he toured with Generation X, which was, oh geez, it was Tosin
That Terry was
Apache
that
and
Terry Bozzio?
no, I don't.
Oh, Generation X. I don't know.
No, this was Axe. This was five guitar players. Yngwie
Oh,
Malmsteen, Tosin Abasi, Steve Vai, Nuno Betancourt, and Zach Wild.
okay.
So the guitar players would come and then they'd go off, and the next guitar player would come up and do it. But the rhythm section, and including Pete, he had to stay. He had like four or five different strings, and these are four strings, and these are five, and these are tuned this way, and these are tuned, and this guy likes these effects, and
Yeah.
this, and you really got to have your act together for that. I don't know how he did it, but he pulled it off.
I
But
actually last summer I had a bass out that I tuned in detuning. In other words, I just moved everything down a step. E became D and on and on. So I have done that before.
yeah. Hey, I know we touched on this last time, but I need to ask you, for Bass Players Only is a bass instruction site, and I wanted to see what kind of insights I can get from you for the people that come wanting to learn bass. Most of them
Mhm.
are of the silver vintaged persuasion, mostly in there's some in their 50s, more so in their 60s, 70s. I've even got students in their 80s, men and women,
Wow.
and they want to play some classic rock riffs with their buddies. They want to play some blues shuffles, maybe some walking bass, some
Mhm.
funk R&B. And they've always wanted to do this, and they now maybe they're retired, semi-retired, and they have a little bit of time. They want to do this. Sometimes things like arthritis and tendonitis and the other bodily woes that creep into our bodies when we get into our 60s, 70s, 80s, sometimes those
Mhm.
are present. So I tell you all that just to give you a context that so you know who we're talking about. And having said that, what advice could you impart to somebody like that who wants to play bass, wants to learn bass? What kind of goals should they have? What should they be thinking about? What sort of approach do you think they should take?
Well, first of all, I think it should be fun. That should be to me, because before I became a professional musician, in other words, that somebody that did this for a living, I was doing it for my own fun and entertainment. And I think you should try to retain that. The other thing that came to mind when you mentioned that was I would make sure that the instrument you're playing is set up by somebody professionally. So, because which is not the case when I was a kid. I don't even know how I never learned how to even set the intonation on my bass till 30 years ago. So I think it's important that the instrument you're playing is not painful and it's not hurting your hands in any way. So the best way to do that is take it to your local guitar shop and have them set it up to let them know that I'm a beginner and I'm learning how to play this instrument and I need for the setup to accommodate that part. That would be my suggestion.
Anything for the as far as the music itself, and where I'm coming from with this question, when I was before I became a professional musician,
Mm-hmm.
I took up the bass. I was, I don't know, 16, 17, somewhere around there. And my goals were all wrong. Trying to play Stanley Clark licks
Mm.
and then I don't know, Jocko was even around when I was there. Yeah, I remember sitting on the floor in my bedroom transcribing Jeff Berlin, Joe Frazier, and that kind of stuff. And I wasn't thinking about what I should have been thinking about. Nobody told me that it's about locking in with the drummer. It's about setting the foundation for the band. It's about making the music feel good. Any insights along those lines that you could share or that you could advise these people as far as what they should be thinking about in terms of goals and what they're trying to achieve while having fun and playing an instrument that is set up properly?
Well, I kind of think in a musician, whether you're amateur or professional, that pedigree is everything. And what I mean by that is, find great ensembles to play with on record. Like, for me, I started out playing along with the Beatles. And then I remember spending hours. I went and bought this little single called Knock on Wood by Eddie Floyd.
Yeah.
I can still see the little Stax logo on it.
Yeah.
I'd put the needle down, and you couldn't even like we didn't have a way to slow them down, the
Right.
record players at that point. And I remember just learning how to play Knock on Wood. And I got the notes right, but the feel wasn't particularly, it just took repetition, really. I would just, for me, there's so much great music out there that's been made, especially for bass players since the late 50s, early 60s, Motown.
Yeah.
Play along with the Allman Brothers, play along with Little Feat, play along with Motown. That's simpler forms of music, but the bass is usually the backbone of all those records we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
So,
It's funny when you mentioned slowing down or unable to slow it down. I remember turntables, they all had 33, 45, 78. Some of them had 16,
wow.
which was all but about half or, a little less than half a 33 and a third. But I remember that. I guess it was pretty rare. But we were also talking about that 45 adapter, and you were talking about putting quarters down on.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh man. But I like what you just said. The only danger in that, because I experienced it myself many, many years ago. When you're
Setting
playing,
the bar too high.
what's that?
Setting the bar too high.
No, not even that. Because if when you're playing along with a record and the record sounds good and you're playing along, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking you're the one making it sound good. Stop the record and play exactly what you played. Not so much.
Yeah,
So I throw that out as a caveat because I think playing along with recordings is great. It's a great thing to do. I still do it.
I do too.
James Jamerson, Grapevine, and For Once in My Life, and Standing in the Shadows of Motown, classic.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned what's coming up, and it sounds like you've got your schedule pretty nailed down for the foreseeable future. But generally speaking, is there anything else that is either down the road or anything else that you've wanted to do but just haven't gotten around to yet?
I'm working on another record. I'm always working on records, and this one is keyboard based, which is completely new for me.
Wow.
So I'm so fortunate in my life is that the three keyboard players that I worked with continually, one was Leon Russell,
Wow.
one was Reese Winans from Stevie Ray Vaughan's band,
Yeah.
and the other one was, there's four of them. The other one's Mike McDonald, the other one's Billy Payne. So I've kind of had the blessing of working with some piano players that are like iconic. So I'm making a record that's piano based with me just singing mostly. I do play on it a little bit. So I'm in the midst, I'm about halfway done with that.
Awesome. Do you have a working title for it yet, or any other information you
It
can?
might be called With Keys. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
All right.
Well,
Well,
if that's a little cheesy, we'll see. Maybe
all
I can
right.
come up with something not so cheese ball.
Yeah, well, definitely keep me posted. I'd be very interested in that.
I will.
I think we talked about. I know Will Lee's name came up in one of the previous interviews because we were talking about how much bass playing he does and also how much singing he does. And I kind of think of you when I think of him. I think of him when I think of you because of
Yeah, he's amazing. And just one of my favorite musicians in the world.
yeah.
In fact, my Sadowski basses are both they're Will Lee models.
I remember asking you either in one of the previous interviews, and I asked Roger Sadowski, I said, why would anybody want that thing, that metal thing over the right in the middle of where you what he I think he calls it an ashtray. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I
Why
don't know.
would anybody
We always take them off.
yeah, exactly. I don't know why anyone would leave that on, would want that on. Will leaves it on, and Marcus Miller leaves it on also. So,
Really?
oh yeah. Well, maybe not on all the bases, but I've seen enough pictures and videos to know.
How do
Yeah.
you slap with the ashtray on there? I don't know.
Well,
Obviously, he's figured it out.
yeah, he's figured it out. Or maybe the slapping base is not the ashtray base. I don't know.
I don't know if you know this, but just as a side, both Christian McBride and Marcus Miller have their own shows on the Sirius Real Jazz channel.
Yeah.
And they're both on the weekend, and they're both fabulous.
Yes, I have heard them. I never made note of what day it was when I was listening, but yeah,
I think Miller time, I want to say, is on Sunday.
yeah, like
I want to
Sunday.
say that Christian McBride might be on Saturday.
Yeah, you know what? Now that you mention it, I think you're right because I interviewed last time I interviewed Christian, he had just had who was it? Lou Donaldson or somebody like that on his show, and Marcus is great. Yeah, like 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon is Marcus's Miller time, and he always has a different theme, like
Yeah.
stuff that he played on, or stuff with Miles, or stuff with other bass players, or just
Christian actually plays duets a lot on his show, which is
yes, yes.
which is something I love. So
Yeah, me too. Awesome. Both great players. Very different kinds of players, but they're both. I remember being surprised when I saw Chick Corea with John McLaughlin and Kenny Garrett, I think. But Christian was playing electric bass, and that
wow.
surprised me at the time. I wasn't expecting that.
Now that I've never seen.
Yeah, and we
But
talked about it.
I'm sure he's amazing at playing electric.
Yeah, he is. Well, I could geek out on bass stuff all day with you, John, but I think we covered a lot, and I look forward to hearing about the how the Doobie Brothers tour goes, and about the new record and the keyboard
Yeah.
and
We'll
everything.
check in next year when I'm 73.
Let's do
No,
that.
wait, 72. Don't get ahead of yourself, Cowan.
That's right. Well, how many years ago was the album 60 released? Let's see.
Let's see, 12, I believe.
Yeah, I'm getting up there myself. So thank you so much. Congratulations on everything. I think what you
Oh, you're welcome.
is awesome. And like I said, please keep me posted on everything.
I will. Pleasure to talk to you as usual.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much, my friend. Take care.
In gratitude, thank you.
It's always a pleasure talking to John Cowan. He's always very inspirational and upbeat and a lot of great stories. And if the Doobie Brothers are coming anywhere close to where you live, don't miss them. I've been listening to the album. It's awesome, and I'm sure they're going to play the old stuff too. So check them out. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside the For Bass Players Only community, men and women in their 60s, 70s, all the way up into their 80s. And you know what they're doing? They're learning bass. They're having the time of their life playing music that they love. Come join them. Experience that incredible transformation for yourself. As I always say, you're never too old to groove. I'll see you right back here next week, same time, same place, with another bass player interview. In the meantime, I'm John Liebman. Let's play bass.